Greetings. My name is Kate Rademacher, and I'm here with Writing for Your Life and Compassionate Christianity. And we are so excited to be back with one of our longtime friends, Marla Taviano. Marla is a multiple time author and has had a really, really interesting journey. She's been on we've interviewed Marla, we've interviewed you before. So I'm excited that you're back. Thank you so much for being back with us. And we're going to be today talking about one of your new books, Whole, and it's a collection of poetry. And I'm really excited to hear sort of how this fits in with, I know this is the last, I think, in a trilogy of poetry books. The subtitle is Whole, Poems on Reclaiming the Pieces of Ourselves and Creating Something New. So I'm really excited to talk about that book. But before we do, maybe you can just remind us or tell us about yourself a little bit, about your background and how you sort of came to be a writer in the first place.
Thank you so much, Kate. It's always fun to chat with you in real life and on Zoom and on podcasts. I There's a lot to my story, and I will keep it to the writing part mostly for this. But I am turning 50 this year on Halloween. I was born on a very warm Halloween morning in 1975. And I have been writing since I can remember. I learned how to read when I was 4 years old from watching Sesame Street, my mom says. And I have just loved books and writing ever since. I didn't realize when I went to college that you could be a writer as a career necessarily. And so I went down a path of elementary education. Before that was nursing, and finally found my groove. I am fairly newly divorced. I am a mom of 3 young adult daughters, and I have been writing this whole entire time. In 2006, I got my first book traditionally published, and it was called From Blushing Bride to Wedded Wife. And it was full of great advice for Christian wives. I had only been married 6 years at that point, and as I just said, I'm now divorced. So my previous writing career from 2006 to 2009, 10-ish, was very conservative Christian, and I went around and spoke to groups of women. And then my faith started to shift, and we spent 2015 to early 2020 in Cambodia as missionaries / humanitarians, and my faith shifted even more over that time. Came back from Cambodia in March 2020. My husband left unexpectedly in September of 2020. I found out 4 months later that he had been cheating on me for several years. And so being in a new to me state, I'm in South Carolina, and I was born and raised and lived in Ohio for most of my life. And being a new single mom, newly divorced, trying to figure out life post missionary. And I've been writing about my faith shifting for quite some time, but it was shifting too quickly for me to write about it. And somehow, and I'm still piecing this all together, but somehow it became poetry. And in September of 2021, I self-published a book of poetry called Unbelieve, Poems on the Journey to Becoming a Heretic. And then in late 2022, I was getting ready to self-publish a second book in that what became a trilogy. And I connected with David Morris, who had just started Lake Drive Books, and he offered to publish my second book, Jaded, through Lake Drive. And so that came out in December of 2022. And then the following year, we re-released Unbelieve through Lake Drive. And in March of 2024, published Whole, which is the third and final book in the, I guess what you could call like a poetry deconstruction trilogy. But I've also self-published a handful of books since then. And we were just talking before we press record that you called me prolific, and I said that I have all of this stuff inside of me, and now it's all coming out. It's like I've been collecting, curating, I'm redoing some things that I had written as my former self, but it's some things that I still care about and still matter deeply to me, but I've just had to revise them a little bit now that I have grown and evolved in several different ways. And so, yeah, talking about books and writing and poetry is one of my favorite things to do.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm really, struck by the book Whole, which is what we're going to talk about today. And the cover, first of all, it's such a beautiful book to hold and to sort of behold. And as you said, Whole is the third in a trilogy, the first being called Unbelieve, the second being called Jaded, and the third is Whole, each with their own subtitles, as you mentioned. And so, can you just talk about sort of how is Whole, the book, different from the previous two books? Is it different in tone? Is it a different style? Can you just talk a little bit about this collection as it stands?
Yeah. First of all, the cover, my oldest daughter designed all three covers of my books, and they are gorgeous. So she drew these. And it's funny because I've kept the sketches that I gave to her. I'm like, can you make it look like this? And my sketch, she did not get her artistic talent from me. And I cannot draw, but somehow she managed to figure this out from what I handed her. So I didn't originally plan for this to be a trilogy. It was going to be, well, I first just started with the one book that was going to be the story of my deconstruction. And then I realized I had a lot more to tell. And so it's going to be two books. And it was going to be Unbelieve would be the first book and tell the whole story. And then the second book was the Happily Ever After. And as I was writing this Happily Ever After book, I realized I still had a lot of unresolved things, a lot of bitterness, anger. And so that second book turned out to be a middle book. And the subtitle of Jaded is A Poetic Reckoning with White Evangelical Christian Indoctrination, which is a mouthful, but I had to put all of those words in there to explain the kind of Christian indoctrination that I was talking about. Um, and so then Whole did get to be my quote unquote happily ever after. But as I mentioned a lot in the book, it was supposed to be called More. It was going to be Unbelieve, Jaded, and More. And I was going to talk about my expansive ideas about God and theology and the world. And I realized that while I do like the idea of more, it was more about me becoming whole, like the who I am inside of me. And I think we think of deconstruction a lot as things are falling apart and there are pieces and it's a mess. And then you have to reconstruct something. And I know there's a lot of talk about that too. Like, if you deconstruct your faith, do you have to reconstruct it? Can you just leave the pieces? What do you do? And so I have a poem. I don't know that I'd be able to find it actually. There are about 300 poems in each of my three books. So when people ask me to find a poem, like, wow, this is really hard to do. But somewhere in one of my books, I talk about how when people ask me if I've reconstructed, I said, yeah, I deconstructed my faith and I put myself back together. Like, that's the reconstruction that I did. So I don't have a set list of beliefs and things like that all put together in a new package. Still figuring that out, being really comfortable with uncertainty and not knowing the answers. But putting myself back together has been a big part of that. And it's been really fun to see how so many parts of me don't need to be discarded. It's been tricky to separate the core of myself from some of these toxic beliefs because they've been so intertwined and tangled up. But when I do, there are so many good things about me that I can keep. I can just still have them and still claim them as my own and use them and enjoy them in different ways now that I've deconstructed from a lot of the toxic stuff.
Well, thanks for that. That's really helpful. And one of the things I was going to ask you, and you pretty much, you sort of touched on it or addressed it already, but I'll still put it out there. Is sort of, do you feel like you're at a place of wholeness, knowing, of course, that like we're all on like an endless journey, and but I just, the word whole is so evocative. So maybe I guess I'm also asking sort of, what to you um, qualifies as being whole, at a time, especially when there's so much divisiveness and we're surrounded by, turmoil and fragmentation in our culture. Sort of how do we get to a place of wholeness? What does it even look like, or what does it feel like? And maybe I can just say, what does it feel like for you?
Yeah, I think I have a poem in the book again, and I know it's in whole somewhere, but let me see if I can just find it because it relates to this. It's about, okay, so it's called Word Study, and I'll just read it. Word study, integer, a thing complete in itself. Integrate, combine one thing with another so that they become a whole. Integrity, the state of being whole and undivided. Integral, necessary to make a whole complete. Integ, whole, complete. Just in case this book gets translated into Latin someday, integ can be the title, LOL. And I think that when I stumbled on that, the idea that integ means whole and complete, and integrity is the state of being whole and undivided. And you talk about someone having integrity, and what that means is all the parts of them are undivided. So, for example, when I was struggling with loving my gay friends, but believing that the Bible said it was a sin to be gay, I couldn't have that integrity there. It was divided, where I felt like what I know and feel in my heart is saying one thing, and what the Bible is saying is something else. And I can't make that go together. And so I think that I'm always going to be on this journey of becoming whole and complete and undivided. But I really just want to live in such a way that everything I do and feel and believe has integrity. Like it's all one thing. And so that's a big part. I mean, there are lots of parts of why I had to give up like a literal view of scripture and even the label of being a Christian. It's because I couldn't figure out how to hold on to that and love people in the way I knew I wanted to love them. And so I write about that in all of my books. Like if becoming a heretic is what I have to do to love people fully and completely, then that's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. Like I will choose the people over what other people might think of me or start to call me or believe about me. And I know that I've chosen people, I've chosen love. My friend Trey Ferguson calls love a commitment to wholeness. And that's I love that because I had someone very close to me tell me once that sometimes love feels like hate, Marla. And she was referring to the fact that you should tell gay people that they're going to hell because that's the most loving thing you can do. It might feel like hate to them, but really you're saving them. And so I've just thrown out that whole idea of love the sin or hate the sin, or sometimes love feels like hate. And I'm clinging to love is the commitment to wholeness. Like, so Kate, if I want to love you and show you love, I want you to be whole, whatever that means for you. And it's not my decision what makes you whole. You know what makes you whole. And that's what I want for my queer friends, for my Muslim friends, Black friends, anyone who has not fit into a certain box or a certain way that historically Christians have thought that they needed to be. And so, yeah, am I all the way whole? No. But it's a constant state of becoming whole and making sure that everything I do and say and believe fits together and lines up with each other, and there's not anything there that doesn't match or that's out of whack. And I'm going to choose love first. I'm going to choose wholeness first, and the love and the wholeness is going to be really a love my neighbor as myself kind of thing, where what I want for me, that's what I want for you, but not I don't want for you the exact things I want for myself. I want you to feel whole and complete doing what you love and being who you are, just like I feel whole and complete doing what I love and being who I am. So that's the exciting, freeing part of this whole thing, is that you don't have to try to cram things into boxes or figure out how to settle all these contradictions. You can just really, truly love people, let them be who they are, let them flourish, help them flourish, do what you can to make that a reality. And we're living in a really frustrating time for all of that, because it feels like the harder we work to help people be whole, the more other people work to tear that down. But yeah, just keep loving and becoming whole myself so that I can help others be whole.
Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Maybe you could read us. I have a couple more questions I would ask you, but before we do, maybe you could just read us a couple more poems. It was great to hear your voice in that way, so that we can get more of a sense of the book. Would that work?
Sure. Okay, so on page 10, this one is called How Do I Look? How do I look? I used to be a conservative evangelical Christian. Now I'm just chilling in the fitting room, trying some other identities on for size, deciding if I'm ready to commit, and keeping the receipt just in case. And then I'll just read the one right beside that. JOY. Jesus first, yourself last, others in between. For years and years, I denied myself and picked up my cross, loved God, loved Jesus, loved my husband, my kids, my church, my neighbors. And if there was anything left, I'd love me. Too bad there was never anything left. And then my favorite ones are the short ones. This one is on page 30, and it's called Sorry You Asked. Sorry you asked. How's your walk with the Lord? Honestly, he's having trouble keeping up. And on page 66, this one is called To the Nth Degree. I unlearned, unbelieved, untangled. I unschooled, unchurched, unmarried. I'm uninterested, unmoved, unimpressed by your unoriginal arguments. I'm uninspired, unfazed, unbothered by your uncompromising stance, and unwilling to further engage with your unending foolishness. I'm sure you understand. And this one is called Thank You For. Thank you for our beautiful kiddos and the cool last name. If I think of anything else, I'll let you know. I'll read one more. This one is called Oh, There You Are. Oh, there you are. They told me to deny myself if I wanted to find God, but she was inside of me the whole damn time.
Thank you. I mean, and it's clear, in addition to having sort of a, quote unquote, irreverent, I'm not sure if that's the right word, there's a lot of playfulness, very sort of like what's the modern vernacular, I don't know, so it's your poems are very like approachable and engaging and easy to read. I know that you did an event for Writing for Your Life in the past where you talked a little bit about your sort of artistic process. And I just wanted to have you, if it's okay, briefly mention that here. At least my understanding or recollection was that oftentimes you write longer prose format and then pull poems from the prose. Is that true? And is that sort of a correct way to summarize it? And then did you do that same process with Whole, or was that different from your other books?
Yes, that's a very good question. And I can't tell you, well, I might be able to tell you, but like going through each poem, some of them I specifically remember used to be a paragraph or prose or from somewhere else. And then I whittled them down. A friend told me that it kind of reminded her of Michelangelo's David, where people asked him how he did that. And he said, I just like carved away everything that wasn't David. And there's David. There's a poem in Whole called Bit by Bit. And it says, I start with a whole bunch of words, then pull my poetry knife out of my pocket and shave, pare, carve, hew until all that's left is a perfect whittle poem. And I I do a lot of that, but some poems do come to me fully formed in the form of a poem, and I will grab my phone and write it down on my notes app. Sometimes I'll just have an idea. I have a excuse me, I have a poem in, I think it's an Unbelieve, and I say that I used to think that I thought in Facebook posts when I was in the shower, and now I realize that they're poems. So I don't know about you as a fellow writer, but I've always got these words going through my head. And sometimes I'm just composing these little ideas. And I've told people, and I love it when they actually go do this, when they said, I'd love to be a poet, but I don't know how to write poems. I'm like, take a post that you wrote on Instagram, just write it out, and then now just chunk it up into lines and little stanzas, the same words. You can take out a few unnecessary words if you want, or leave them. So some of my poems read like sentences. None of them are ambiguous. They all make a lot of sense. Like you said, I forget the word you used, accessible or something like that. But that's the idea behind that, is for, I don't want anyone to read my poetry and not understand it. The only time you might not understand something is if I'm using some specific evangelical Christian jargon. You didn't grow up around that. I've had people, including my sister-in-law, send me a text and say, "What is this?" And I'm like, "Oh, a sword drill is where you hold your Bible up, and then the Sunday school teacher tells you a reference, and you have to see how fast you can look it up." So, but other than that, my poems are very easy to understand and very easy for other people to write. And I love that about it, because it's not intimidating. And my goal is to inspire other people, which has happened over and over and over again. And I get so excited every single time it does. And so I have no formal poetry training. It's not conventional. It doesn't follow any rules. Like you said, there's a little bit of like modern jargon in there, and it's very informal. And that's how I want it. That's how my writing has always been. I'm reading back through my old books that I wrote as an evangelical Christian. And while they're very painful on one level, the writing is also really good. Like, I really stand by that writing. It's funny. And the compliment that I've always gotten from people is, it felt, when I was reading your book, it felt like we were just sitting beside each other on the couch talking. And that's where people get hung up. I think they have this idea that writing needs to sound really professional, but it doesn't. I mean, sure, you don't want to put in a whole lot of extra words that we would use when we're talking, but you want it to sound like it's coming through in your voice. You want people to feel like you're just sitting there on the couch chatting. And I don't know if that's something I've just gotten good at over the years, or if I've always had a knack for it, but I think anyone can do it. And I ghostwrite for people, and they think they can't write, but I take their video content or their audio clips, and sometimes I'm just transcribing it and barely changing anything. And then they read it and they say, "Wow, this is so good. And it sounds just like me." And I say, "It is you." Like, you said that and I wrote it down. And I hate to tell you my secret, but that's the secret. So I want anyone who wants to write to just write, and don't get bogged down and intimidated by rules. And like I said, that's what I love about my poetry that I've written, is that that's what people say to me. "You made me feel like I could do it. I read your book and I went and immediately wrote 5 poems." That just makes me really happy.
Well, that's awesome and so inspiring. And also just inspiring that you've really taken a leap and published your poems. I have some poems sitting on a shelf, which I'm looking at right now, and I've thought about publishing, and I've sort of been on the fence. So I just, I also appreciate the inspiration for not just writing, but publishing your poetry, which can be hard. So that gets to my next question. As we were talking before we started recording, this is, of course, a lot of people listening are identify as spiritual writers or faith-based writers, or they want to be, or they, some adjacent to that somehow. So, you've published traditionally, you've published with a hybrid publisher, you published self-publishing. So you've taken a lot of different pathways. And I'm just curious if, in the last couple of years you've had any sort of surprises or lessons learned that you can share with others. I know that you mentioned you have worked with David Morris, who's fabulous, and like Dry Books. Just more broadly, are there any sort of things or, again, insights you have to share about publishing or writing, the process of it at sort of this point in your life and career? Thanks.
Yeah, great question. And let me start by doing this little plug for something my friend Taylor and I did last April during National Poetry Month, and we're doing it again this April. It's called Poet to Published. And we tell you that we can help you self-publish a book of poetry in 30 days. It generally helps if you've got some poems written ahead of time. But out of the 16 people in our group, I think 7 of them self-published a book of poetry, and I have copies of all of those. So if that's something that's interesting to people, they can just contact me through Instagram or marlataviano.com. But so my history with publishing is I self-published a book in 2001. And it was about my student teaching experience in Japan, which I thought was amazing and that everyone would want to read. And all the fine people who got my manuscript told me, we don't really need to read stories about people's student teaching experiences. So I self-published that. And then in 2006, so this is completely irrelevant now, but I filled out this form that you could have. You pay $75 and you submit to these, I don't know, you send it to this place and they send it out to these Christian publishing companies. And then if they want to look at it, they do. Long story short, the acquisitions editor at Harvest House Publishers in Eugene, Oregon, found my little synopsis and reached out to me. And she said, listen, I never reach out to these things, like never. I just ignore them. Every month they come to my desk and I ignore them. But something about yours really piqued my interest. So I got a traditional publishing deal with Harvest House in 2005 for my first book, From Blushing Bride to Wedded Wife. Then they asked me what else I could write. And a book about sex was one of the things I told them. And so that was what I wrote. It's called Is That All He Thinks About? And that came out the following year. And then that acquisitions editor actually told me, you really need an agent. Like the publishing house is just working one-on-one with you and they can tell you whatever they want and you're just accepting it. So you need to get an agent. So I did that. She knew someone. I got an agent. And then I published another book with Harvest House, this time with an agent, and then a book with Howard Books with Simon and Schuster, also with my agent. And then I started writing some things and we had some disagreements about what he wanted me to write. And so we parted ways, signed with another agent. Then that whole long story, moved to Cambodia. My book started going out of print. I wasn't online. They weren't selling. It's just kind of this sad story of the timing of everything. But then I started self-publishing ebooks, not print books, because I was living in Cambodia and I didn't know how that would all work. So I just did it through Amazon. And like I said, in 2021, when I self-published Unbelieve, I went through Amazon's program and I did the paperback this time, did not know what I was doing. My friend was the first one to get a copy of the book before I even got it. I didn't do a test copy. She tells me, Marla, I can't even read the font in your book. It's so tiny. I had not resized the book from like the 8.5 by 11. And so when it went down to book size, that made the font, I don't know, like 7 or 6 point font. So learned a lot from that. And then, like I said, I met David through some Instagram live that I had done and we connected. So he took care of all of that for me. And that's been a great experience. But that I joined Lake Drive the very first year. So I think they've only been in existence. I don't even know. I'm losing track of time, like 3 years now, maybe. So I was there that first year. So David was a one-man show and had a lot on his plate. And I think I'm the one that's published the most books with Lake Drive, with 3. And so that's not really an option right now for me to keep doing all these book ideas that I have, keep doing them with Lake Drive. David doesn't have the capacity for that. And so I have 3 books that I've self-published since 2023. One is called Please Cut Up My Poems. One is called Poem Art Therapy. And then What Makes You Fart is my most recent book. Self-published those all through Amazon. And I've gotten really good at that now and figured that out. So what is coming next? I have so many book ideas, some things that I want to redo. And so if there's simple things that I don't expect to sell a ton of copies. I just want them out in the world. I'm going to go ahead and self-publish those. There are a couple book ideas. I think it'd be really great to have a traditional publishing deal. But what I know about that is that you need a big platform. You need a way to sell a lot of books. And that's what I have been struggling to do. So as a single mom who's supporting my family and then trying to write and then trying to promote my books, there's just too much all going on at once. So what I will say is, I don't know if I mentioned already here that I think I said I'm turning 50 this year, and I have this goal to do 50 podcast interviews with old friends, with new friends, chatting about things, chatting about my books. It's partly just a way to have fun conversations, but it's also a way to get the word out about my books, because I've had people tell me, "Oh, you're so great at talking about your books and marketing, promoting." Well, maybe, but it's just getting out to the same people over and over again. And with the algorithms the way they are, even they're not seeing these. So I'm basically saying great things about my book to people who've already read my book. So the idea of getting on podcasts and getting in front of other people's audiences is kind of my way to try to get the word out about the book. Example, Whole, I sold a few hundred copies as pre-orders in February and March of 2024. I think a total of 800 copies, which was good for me. And then all the rest of the months in 2024, I don't think I sold in 2 digits, like each of those months. Like one month is 2 copies, 8 copies, 4. And I sell some on my own and I have them in a couple stores, but it's just been a big challenge. So even for people who are great writers and have great ideas, it's hard to get a traditional book deal if you can't guarantee the publisher that you can sell a lot of books. And I have a nice sized reach, but even that, it's really, really hard to do. But I'm not giving up, and I'm almost 50 and I'm still going to keep doing this. And when I'm 60 and when I'm 70, I want to do it all the way till I cannot do it anymore. So for anyone who at any age, don't be discouraged, but I will tell you, it is a lot of work. Some people, I think, maybe get lucky and don't have to put that much effort into it. That has not been the case for me, but I love it and it's important to me. And I want my words to reach people's ears and eyes. And so I'll keep doing whatever I need to do. So this year we will see. We will see.
Well, thanks for that. I was going to ask you about your 50 and 50. So I think that's really fun and a great idea, a very creative way to make sort of, handle the platform or take a stab at platform building in a new way that, that caught my attention. That was part of why I reached out to, suggest another chat. So I'm glad we did this.
This is interview number 2
That's
of
right.
hopefully 50. So you got in on the ground floor. So thank you.
Good. I'm glad. I feel so like are you doing the thermometer bubble? Like, so we're at 2?
Want to. I got to figure something out. I'm not great with the graphics and keeping up with all that, but I definitely do want to keep track of it visually in some way. I did make a spreadsheet. David's the one that finally convinced me to use spreadsheets. That I just put everything in a Google Doc. I'm like, Marla, you got to put this one in a spreadsheet, honey. You cannot keep track of 50 podcasts. So
when you get to the end of the year, you'll be like talking on, random podcasts like, Dog Walkers of America or something like that.
I hope so. I don't even have a dog. I have a cat. Maybe cat walkers.
Cat memes of America.
Yeah.
Well, good luck. Keep us posted. I'm glad to be on the thermometer. Well, my final sort of big question, then maybe I'll just ask you a final question, and then of course, want to hear where we can find you online? You mentioned Instagram and your website, but just make sure ask you to repeat that at the end and anything else you want to say. But before we do that, just I know that a big area passion of yours is social justice,
Mhm.
um, and in several domains, including racial justice. And so just thinking about wholeness and reclaiming and creating newness. Can you talk a little bit about sort of if and how you address social justice in your book Whole, and sort of how your vision of wholeness kind of includes social reform and social justice movements?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. In each one of my books, Unbelieved, Jaded, and Whole, there is a section or more than one section um, on white supremacy or racial justice. There's disability justice, a section on queerness. All of these things are I'm constantly writing more and more and more about them. I want people to know how important that is to me. So as I'm waking up to all of these things and talking about them and writing about them, I started sharing them. I haven't always done it the very best way. That's been a learning curve for me. But one of the things that I love is my White Girl Learning account on Instagram. So it's at White Girl Learning. I started that in 2017 when I was in Cambodia, and I've been reading books voraciously my whole life. But I realized at some point that they were mostly white authors, and that you have to be really intentional to read authors that are Black, Indigenous, Asian, Latinx. And so I started doing that and started posting those books. And I talk a lot about how I used to do a lot of like I would tithe, I would volunteer in the nursery, I would do all these different things that just weren't really me. And now I am gladly like donating my money to things that do matter to me. A lot of I do work with several Black friends who own bookshops or organizations that are, one in particular, Liberation is Lit. My friend Taylor, who does the Poet to Published with me, is a Black woman here in Columbia, South Carolina, where I live. And she's just constantly sharing books. She's going to the state house and standing up for all these people's rights. And she just really wants liberation for all, and she's doing it largely through literature. So I'll go to Goodwill, other thrift stores, find books by Black, Indigenous authors, queer authors, disabled authors, and then find sponsors for the books and then donate them to her. Then she could sell them to keep the organization going. And so that that's one of the things when I said that the parts of me that are still there and still good, like I've always had that love for people inside of me. But before it was, how can I get them saved? How can I get them to heaven so they're okay for eternity? And now it's more, how can I make things right and fair and just here on earth, which may be the only thing we have, depending on what really actually happens after we die. But now this is the most important thing. So I do a lot around reparations, where repairing things, giving back. So many people in this country, they're like they have no generational wealth because their ancestors' labor was stolen from them. They couldn't read, they couldn't write, they couldn't own property, they couldn't vote, they couldn't do all these things, and giving back in those ways. So I do a lot of encouraging my fellow white people to find ways to make micro reparations, which could be giving $32 to sponsor a box of books for a Black woman who's working hard for liberation for everyone. And yeah, it's my favorite thing is doing this good work um, in ways that fill me up. And so that's what I encourage people to do. If books aren't your thing, find a thing that is your thing, and you can use that to to raise awareness, to fight for justice, to help bring wholeness. And it's a really cool way to live.
Great. Well, thank you for that. So, Marla, I'm so glad to be talking to you again. And, maybe if you are still working on your 50 goal by the end of the year, you'll swing back around to Writing for Your Life and do
Yeah.
your books that have come out and are coming out. But today we've been talking about Whole, your book, Poems on Reclaiming the Pieces of Ourselves and Creating Something New, which is a fabulous book of fun and accessible and inspiring poems. So, can you just, in closing, sort of tell us where we can find you online, where we can get your books, and if there's anything we haven't touched on that you want to say before we wrap up, that would be great.
I spend most of my time on Instagram and Threads currently, and I will tell any writer friends who are listening that Threads has been a really cool place to find other writers. Um, every time I log on to there, I see all these posts about writing. I follow agents, other writers, people who are doing cool things. So you can just find me there at Marla Taviano and see all the people I'm following and follow follow all of them. I have a website, marlataviano.com, that my friend Corinne graciously set up for me. And she lives in Las Vegas. I'm going to be visiting her at the end of the month, and we're going to do some updates there. I'm hoping to get a Shopify store where my books will be for sale on the site, and I can sell some of my art and some other things that I'm doing. And then let's see, am I anywhere else? Oh, Substack, marlataviano.substack.com, I think is how that that works. It's called Writing Wholefarted, but it's under my name. So I post there every Thursday, usually a poem, sometimes an original one, sometimes an older one with a little bit of backstory. And then I actually have a paid subscription to that too, where I get more personal and talk about some things with a smaller group of paid subscribers. But yeah, I love to meet new people. I love to hear from you if you've read my books. I love to give away my poem art. And so I really love connecting with people who say, I heard you on this podcast. So definitely reach out if you listen to me and Kate chatting today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Marla, and congratulations on the publication of Whole. And it's part of a trilogy with Unbelieve and Jaded. So, and your other books that you're working on. And thank you so much for coming back, and keep us posted, as I said, about how your 50 and 50 goes. And we'll be excited to be tracking you. And in the meantime, thanks again, and many blessings in your continued writing and publishing journey.
Thank you so much, Kate. And I hope you publish those poems.
Oh my gosh, thank you for the encouragement. That's really helpful. You're definitely an encourager. So thank you again, Marla, and appreciate your time.
Thank you.